Well, first I'd like to thank Rob and Gracia for first organizing this, and I think that it's a great opportunity for teachers around the world and people who just want to improve themselves as in their teaching practices. So thank you for that, and thank you for Mary. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me as well. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about using the text-based approach for grammar presentations. And hopefully you'll get a few practical ideas on what to do in your classrooms in order to make grammar a little bit more contextualized and meaningful for your students. So let's take first a quick look at a few questions. So I'd like us to think about two basic questions. The first one is, where do learners generally find new language, such as grammar and vocabulary, in their everyday lives? And where is interesting, useful, and authentic language found in abundance? So generally, students come into class and they'll have questions about new grammar or new vocabulary that they've heard somewhere in particular. And often when we're looking for particular places where we would hope students could find new language, we think about texts. So as I said, today we're going to be talking a little bit about how we can introduce language through texts. And these can be found in stories, in articles, in comic books, in poems, in circulars, videos, and so many other things. So these are full of language that students can relate to, that they can find meaningful, and that is interesting to them, which is something that sometimes grammar books might not be. So sometimes the topics aren't necessarily something that they see in their everyday lives, or that students can actually relate to. So the idea is that this will help them find things that are engaging and that students want to discover. So I'm going to show you today two different examples. So on one side, we have a chant. So here we're thinking about a chant or a jazz chant that we could use in class. So it's like, do you like dancing? Yes, I do. Do you like dancing? Yes, I do. She likes dancing. She likes dancing. So and if you notice here, what we're thinking about is something that's rhythmic and that students see a pattern in. So if you notice, I've circled a few words. So I have dancing, likes, do you like? And these are some different topics that we might want to introduce in language. So we could introduce, for example, the ing form. We can introduce the simple present or question forms with the simple present using this particular chant. And then on the other side, I have an example of an infographic. So here it used to be impossible, and it has different facts that might be interesting for students to become familiar with. And if you notice, it says, so we have one arrow pointing to it used to be impossible, and another arrow pointing to see. So here we could introduce either used to, so things that used to be impossible and that are actually possible now, and we can introduce the infinitive form through these multiple examples. So here, if you notice, what I'm proposing is that we take a look at different kinds of texts and we expose students to them, and then we get students to be able to go into the analysis of language through the text that they've discovered. So here I have some steps that aren't in the right order. And what I'm going to ask us to do is to take a look at some of the key words, and then we'll take a look at what the order actually is. So it says here first that students engage in meaningful practice. So we probably don't want to start out that way. So that probably goes later in the process. It also says that learners are encouraged to recognize grammatical patterns that are present in the language sample provided. We have that the target language is presented to learners in meaningful contexts, that the instructor provides an explanation of grammatical forms if needed, and that the instructor assesses whether learners have grasped the target language. So as I said, this isn't the correct order, it's just something to get you thinking. And now we're going to take a look at what is the order that we would want to use if we're using the text-based approach. So first, what we would want to do is introduce the language in a meaningful context. And as we said before, this can be a story, it can be a comic book, it could be an advert, it can be a circular from a supermarket, for example. And what we would want is that the language that we would want to introduce is embedded in this particular context. Then what we would go on to is having students recognize the grammatical patterns that are present in the sample provided. So this can be done by color coding things, by putting things in different orders. We could, for example, also provide questions for students to notice what are these important things. So here we have some different strategies that we might want to use. As I mentioned, first, you might want to have students and analyze the language through answering questions. And this can focus on the form, the meaning, or the use of the language that is being introduced. In my experience, starting off with meaning and use is generally very helpful because students have a lot to say about this. And then the form can come later because students will be more familiarized with what they're saying and why they're using it. So then we might also want students to think aloud and figure out the grammatical rules on their own or collaboratively. So again, this is an opportunity for students to work together, for students to peer teach and give each other the input that they might need. And then we have that students get immediate feedback if they overgeneralize or if they start coming up with the wrong rule. So what we would want students to do is to come up with the accurate rule. But if they seem to be going in a direction that doesn't seem the one that we want, then we can always steer them back. So then the next step is, as we said, providing a grammatical rule. So if this is necessary, so if we feel that students have gotten as much from the form, the meaning, and the use as we might have wanted, then we might not need that. But if there are a few gaps, then this is the opportunity to do so. So then the instructor assesses whether learners have grasped the target language or not, and this can be done through concept checking questions or CCQs, and it can also be done through a task. So maybe we have students answer true or false, or they might answer to multiple choice questions in order to be able to highlight the most important aspects of the language. Lastly, we would want them to engage in meaningful practice. So once the language has been introduced, once they've analyzed it on their own, questions have been answered, it's been clarified, they're ready for the practice. So what are the goals? So why would we want to use this particular approach? So first, what we want students to do is to have input that makes sense to them. So it provides an opportunity for students to get input that has meaning and that assists their acquisition of the grammatical points. As we've said before, sometimes it's very dry and students don't feel engaged by the target language within the context that or without the context that was provided. We would want students to also have a consciousness of the target language, which means that we're not always going to be there to help them analyze language. We want to give them those skills to be able to go out and attack language on their own, chew it up, and discover on their own. And we would also want to provide students with meaningful communication opportunities. So this is why the peer teaching, the collaboration also helps so that they can actually have conversations that make sense to them. So some important considerations have to do with the text selection, the guiding questions, and the kinds of activities. So the kinds of texts that we want to choose are contextualized, meaning bearing. The guiding questions, as we said, focus on form, meaning, and use. And the types of activities that we would want to use help raise their consciousness. So this can be consolidating patterns, it can be classifying structures, it can be hypothesis building, or reconstruction and deconstruction. So to end today, before we go to that last question, I'd like us to think about a quote. So this is from Blaise Pascal, and we could say, people are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they themselves have come up to discover than those which have come from the minds of others. And what we would want is for students to engage and to discover on their own. So this is the approach And this is why we're thinking about texts and getting students involved in the process. So thank you. I think my time is about to end. And really, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I hope you're taking some great ideas with you.